Everybody, I'm Neil Cavuto, and now we know you pay more at the pump, shoppers slump. The first real proof today, retail sales showing their weakest rise in 9 months. A new poll finding 68% of Americans are now holding back. Enter the President of the United States today, promising taxes should go up, at least on the higher income. Something the Cato Institute's Dan Mitchell says will be disastrous, way beyond the higher income. Well, it is a case, I guess, of bad timing, Dan.
We already have a weak economy. The key thing to look at isn't what's happening with personal consumption, it's what's happening with personal income, because in the long run, that governs all the things we care about, consumption, savings, etc. And we have a weak recovery. We're not recovering the lost economic output like with past recessions, and now Obama's coming in not only proposing higher taxes on small business owners, investors, and entrepreneurs, but then he also wants this automatic tax hike trigger. So the politicians get rewarded when they overspend by getting a tax increase from us that they don't even have to vote on.
You know what I didn't understand about this tax hike trigger, and my producer was trying to explain it to me, there is no commensurate spending cut trigger. I mean, it's all, if you're not meeting the numbers, it's taxes that go up, not spending that is cut.
Oh, no, there's also a provision that would, it's a debt fail-safe trigger, and part of it supposedly would apply to spending. But think about it, if you're a politician and you know that you're already over the limit, you increase $1 of spending, and what happens is you get 50 cents of tax increases, and then you get to keep 50 cents of the additional spending. So it's sort of like me and you having a deal where every time I do something wrong, you give me more money. That's great for me. It's not so good for you.
I'm just wondering, though, getting into the debate late, as some of his critics have charged, and offering solutions, at least, for example, on the tax thing that we thought were repudiated last fall, and a concession the president made to extend the Bush tax rates for everybody back before Christmas time. I thought that was at least settled. What is the president saying? That it's not, and this is going to be his holy grail all over again? What?
I think Obama's in a tough position. He was embarrassed because everyone said he was AWOL on the budget fight, especially after Congressman Paul Ryan put forth a detailed plan. And so Obama, in effect, had no choice but to come out with something. Now, he hasn't given us a real budget. It's just a set of talking points. But he, in effect, took the Fiscal Commission proposal from last year, which had lots of tax increases, and then he moved it even farther to the left. But this wasn't really a budget speech. This was a 2012 election speech. That's why he was waving the bloody flag of class warfare. He's hoping that if he can make everyone demonize the rich, he can somehow convince the middle class not to pay attention to the higher taxes and bigger burden of government that they're facing.
But you know, Dan, I don't care whether you're the right or left on this issue. When you hike taxes, that in itself is a higher price, per se. It is an inflationary development. So that, coupled with what we know will be higher prices across the board, going way beyond gas. We've seen it in everything from, you know, grains, wheat, barley, bread that have gone up double-digit, to a host of just precious metals that have gone up, in some cases, triple-digit. Not a good timing-wise issue, right?
I worry that we may be on the cusp of another 1970s lost decade of stagflation. Now, I know there are people out there who say that QE2 is okay and there's not really any signs of inflation, but all the things you just mentioned, plus the falling value of the dollar in international exchange markets, I'm more in the camp of thinking that inflation is something we should worry about. So we're getting the toxic combination of inflation, higher taxes, more government spending, more regulation. Of course this is a recipe for economic stagnation, and that's why we have a very weak subpar recovery. Normally, when you have a recession, that's bad news, but you bounce back and you jump above the trend line before you settle back in at that 3% growth. We haven't had the bounce back. We're struggling just to get back to 3%, and we're not even there.
All right, Dan Mitchell, thank you very much. Good seeing you again.
Thank you.
Tax cuts that went to every millionaire and billionaire, for millionaires and billionaires, millionaires and billionaires.
Well, word now, the president might be moving down the financial food chain a little bit. Listen to this.
If we just made a little bit of an adjustment in terms of the cap on Social Security, that would do a significant amount to stabilize the system.
Did you catch that? Right now, this cap that he's referring to stands at 6.2%. technically 4.2%, got a 2% one-year reprieve on income up to $107,000, about $107,000. Now that is a whole lot less than the $250,000 and over crowd the president was targeting for these so-called tax hikes, or so we thought. The Cato Institute's Dan Mitchell says this could be just the beginning. You know, that was a big deal, what he let slip by there, Dan.
It's a big deal, but it's even worse than we think, because we're used to thinking of the Social Security payroll tax as 6.2%. It's really 12.4% when you count the so-called employer portion, which of course comes out of our compensation. And so it's possible, depending on what Obama actually comes out with, and he's being very cagey so far, but it's possible we could be talking about a 12.4 percentage point increase in marginal tax rates on a lot of small business owners and families out there that are in this income range.
But the fact of the matter is, Dan, even paying for the new health care plan, the Medicare, the so-called FICA tax, and some of these others are going to go up for the upper income. So this trend is already in place, regardless what he does to that limit as it stands for everybody.
And that's why this should really worry us, because many years ago, actually in my lifetime, in your lifetime, it used to be that the Medicare and the Social Security payroll tax were aligned. Then they broke the Medicare tax and brought it up to about $125,000, and then they brought it and imposed it on all income, and then under Obamacare, they're going to raise the tax rate and also apply it to investment income. So if they're allowed to go ahead and bust the wage-based cap on Social Security, that is a giant marginal tax rate increase that will make the Bush tax cut seem trivial in terms of the economic damage that it could impose on the economy.
You know, if you think about it, then let's say they remove the ceiling altogether. You're talking about raising a lot of money. There's no doubt about that. But there is no impetus at that point to even look at cost constraints of the program, because presumably you've got all this gravy coming in, and you don't have to.
Two things that are important. You're right. If they have a tax increase, that means no reform of the program. We have more than 30 countries around the world that have stabilized their long-run finances by moving toward personal retirement accounts. If Obama gets a giant tax increase, that's out the window. But then the other thing to realize is that a giant tax increase won't work. When you impose a big marginal tax rate increase on work effort, you're going to get lower labor supply, you're going to get people using tax deductions, loopholes, and shelters. The government on paper may think it's going to get this much money, but in reality, they'll get this much money.
That's the history. I think the bottom line here that I want to stress for folks who might not be familiar with this, if you think this is just the 250,000 and over crowd, and we're looking at that ceiling at 107,000, we've just done the math for you. It's changed a lot.
And it's going to be a huge, huge hit on the economy that affects even workers under 107,000, because if our economy goes from, say, 2.5% growth down to 2.1% growth, that may not seem like much, but over 20 years, you're talking about several $1,000s of lower income for an average household.
And Dan, as you astutely pointed out, if your boss is forking over that extra dough, he's less than kind not only to give you raises, or his generous raises, but to have you at all. We'll watch it closely. Dan Mitchell, thanks, my friend.